Well, when I was a teenager, I had the crazy dream of becoming a book critic. And then, lo and behold, I made that huge transition to being a film critic. So it was always my dream job, in a way. I first started being a critic when I was at university. I went to Cambridge and I was the film reviewer for the student paper. And when I was there, I had a friend of mine called Nina Kaplan, and she was one of my writers. And she was desperate to get into film journalism, and she started writing for Sight and Sound, and I kind of followed her coattails onwards. And she started writing for Metro, which was just launching then, which is a free newspaper in the UK. And she was the film editor. She hated horror movies and things like low-rent comedies, so I'd leap on and do those for her, so that's how I started doing it. I make a full-time living as a film critic, so I'm very lucky from that point of view. Many people go to me, wow, that's just such an amazing dream job. That's what people usually say. Like, you say film reviewer, they're like, wow, that's so brilliant. And then you explain it involves watching 3 films back-to-back on Mondays and Tuesdays and Fridays, and they go, oh, I don't know if that sounds so much fun after all. But I do feel that if you don't really enjoy the fact that on Monday morning your job is to go and watch Transformers 3, then perhaps you're not in the right job after all. I think in terms of public misconceptions of film criticism, I don't think the public really cares that much about film criticism, sadly. I'd love it if that was the case. I think before I became a film critic, I always thought that film critics may be a bit out of touch and a bit grumpy. And I think that that is perhaps a criticism that people have of critics. If you go and see a mainstream film and critics give it 1 star or something, I think the popular perception of that is like, oh, they're out of touch, they don't really understand, you know, they're just grumpy, they just have no interest really, they don't have any fun in cinema, they're just seeing it from this aloof perspective. And then I remember going to see Matrix Revolutions, and I thought this is exactly the sort of film that if I was reading a critic and they said this is terrible, I'd be like, oh, what do they know? And then I saw Matrix Revolutions and it really pretty much sucked. So I was sort of like, maybe they do know what they're talking about after all. I think the longer I've been a critic, the more grumpy I've noticed that I've become, and I think there is a danger of becoming out of touch because you are in this completely artificial world where you see films the entire time. If one person goes to see a film once a week, that's actually a lot. If you go to the cinema once a week, just as a normal person, a civilian, that's a huge amount. Whereas as a professional reviewer, you go and see 6 films a week. So it does skew your perspective about what the public are interested in, what the public see. So I think it is difficult to try and maintain that point of view of what it's actually like to go to the cinema, pay to see something and go and see it. And as a reviewer for a mainstream national paper, I really try and hang on to that idea that it's Friday night and I'm going to see a film, what am I going to see? That's the reader that I'm writing for. I think the very word critic, yes, implies critical, implies something negative. And I think increasingly I find it difficult to maintain a positive because you've seen so many films as a reviewer, so many films. You're like, oh, I've seen this film before and this is what's negative, you know, oh, we've all seen that. And you forget that people haven't seen that after all. And I do try and keep the positive in what I'm doing and try and keep the joy of what you're doing. It sounds sort of quite simple and Pollyanna-ish, but I think when you see as many films, you can feel very fatigued by it, and it's important to keep it fresh. I mean, I never really call myself a film critic, even though I'm a member of the London Film Critics Circle. I suppose technically I am a critic, but I've always seen myself as a reviewer. I think of critics as people who write for Sight and Sound and Little White Lies and perhaps have more of a sort of highbrow analysis of what they're doing. I like to think that I bring analysis to what I'm doing. I'm there to entertain and inform. And as I think I primarily see my job as being witty and informative. First of all, you have to just give the basic outline of the plot and what's involved, and you know the basic outline. Other than that, it's very subjective. Anyone who says that criticism isn't subjective is lying. It is completely about subjectivity. And I think if you're an established critic, then people slightly get to know your personality and what you like and don't like. And I think all you can do is be upfront. For example, I don't really like Westerns. So if I'm writing about a Western, you have to sort of go, well, I perhaps don't like Westerns. I can see how it relates to other Westerns. But I think I'd probably say that I put myself in the piece. Not all critics do that. But for me, it's important to put your personality in there and be really upfront about the fact that it's subjective and come from your perspective. While I've been a critic, it's about evolving your own voice. I see that as my way that I communicate with people. It's from me and it is my voice, and I do it from a first-person perspective. And I've always seen myself as that kind of reviewer. That's the sort of person I am. And lots of people aren't, but I think I see it as talking to my readers and explaining what I like and what I think they will like. It's a kind of conversation. I know lots of people really don't like star ratings. I find them useful. I think there is a pressure. Now, I won't name which paper it is, but there is a broadsheet paper, and they were told, their critics, at one point, I don't think it's under the current editor, that they could only write 2-star and 4-star reviews because nobody reads 3-star reviews. And actually, if you're a film company, you don't want a 3-star review because it's kind of like, in the middle. You know, it's traditionally between 1 and 5 stars. People, if you're reading a 5-star review, you'll read a 5-star review because they're like, what's that? 4-star review will be like, oh, that's quite interesting. Yeah, 3-star review might not be interested, but everyone's going to read a 1-star review as well. So it's like, what's that? And I think there is a tendency by some critics, again, from national newspapers, to give 5-star reviews to very hyped films. And I see this as a new trend that I hadn't really seen before. So if the new James Bond comes out, it's like, 5 stars, everyone goes crazy. And I'm quite surprised there isn't more of a measured opinion about that. I think because there's now such a short time often between when a company will show you a film, a studio will show you a film, and when you're meant to write your review. You come out of the film, you're all hyped up, and you're meant to write and file your review straight away. And I think that has skewed how people review them and the star ratings that they give them, because there's that tendency to give a film 5 stars makes it news. If I kind of go on, it's like, the new James Bond comes out, people give it 5 stars, that makes front page headlines. Give it 4 stars, it's like, that's nice for it, but it doesn't make it news. There's this new tendency to shower 5 stars on big film releases, and I'm not, because it's sort of promoting the paper and the journalist who's written it, because it's making it news. I say that because I often do punditry on news programmes, so I'll come on and they're like, it's amazing, last night all these critics gave the new James Bond film 5 stars, come on and talk about it. So they've generated headlines themselves. The review has made a front page. It's come from the back of the arts section right to the front page and become national news. Also, when you do a star rating, you suddenly have this sliding scale. So you could have a week where there aren't that many great films, and you think, well, within this week, you know, this was the 4-star film, this was the 2-star film. And the next week comes along and it's full of amazing films or full of much worse films. And then you have that thing of, oh, it's all comparative. So I gave that one 2. So does that make that one 3? And that's why the star system it's difficult, because you've got your own personal star system of like, oh, well, last week I gave it 2, so this is a 4-star film. I mean, presumably other people aren't really thinking about that, but you're agonising over it. And you're trying to get your own system within your head worked out. It's difficult. You look at the title of a film, you look who's in it, and you look at the star rating. That will mean whether you read the review or not, but it'll also decide whether you go to see the film or not. So I don't expect everyone to read every single word, perhaps, of my reviews. They are really short, so really, you know, maximum 300 words. It's not that long. You know, some of my reviews are about 100 words long, and I think you can, if you grab someone, then they will read it. It's about being a good writer as much as anything. I know there is that worry that if you know, why have a review at all? Why not just have a star rating? But I think people want to know a little bit more, perhaps, than a star rating. But I mean, you know, it's fair enough. If a film is 3 stars and you're not that interested in it, however brilliant my analysis of it is, they might not be interested. And that's for my publication. I have to say that I'm talking to you as someone who's writing for everybody. I write for a paper that's picked up free throughout the United Kingdom, so anyone will pick it up. If you're writing perhaps a really long thought out piece about a particular film, then it probably doesn't make sense to have a star rating at the top. It's not about whether someone decides to see the film, it's about how you've written about it, how you've thought about it, how they're thinking about it. So it's for a different audience. What happens often, actually, is that the marketing team will come along and say, what did you think of this film? Just of interest. And I'll say, and that's as much as I get. They don't say there's any implication for that, or there's this. They just want to know, I think, what the buzz would be on a film, or if it's, you know, how they... There was famously quite a difficult period where there was a new Pink Panther film came out, the reboot. Like, everyone could tell this was going to be a huge mistake. And we had a huge wraparound sort of advertising thing in Metro promoting it. And there were no press screenings for this film, which is always a worrying sign, because it generally means that the film is not good because they're too scared to show it to critics. But we had a critic who was in the States who reviewed it early and gave it 1 star, and it got in the paper. So there's a slightly awkward situation where they'd paid for this huge wraparound at the front of the paper. The whole paper turned pink for the Pink Panther, and we'd kind of given it this really bad review. But I didn't get into any trouble about it. This is just a slightly awkward thing that happened. There's definitely no pressure. Well, I've been writing for Metro since 2000 when it started, and I've been a full-time film editor for 10 years. And I I think in that time, in the last 10 years, there have been three major shifts. One is the rise of the internet, obviously. Second is the rise of celebrity culture. And the third is the blurring of the line between editorial and commercial in terms of print journalism. Those would be the three main things. I mean, internet and print journalism is something that's talked about endlessly in terms of the convergence, and this is the death knell of print. The rise of celebrity means that there's just, in terms of coverage, perhaps not as a critic, but as a film editor, I was previously when my section was an arts section, I'd be allowed to write interviews with directors, people I was interested in. So if I saw a film and it had Wes Anderson in, I'd be like, oh, I want to interview him rather than the star. And now I work under an entertainment section rather than an arts section. That's kind of the broader term. And so you're encouraged to interview the stars. They won't really take interviews with directors. It's a small shift, but quite a significant one. It's all about, the names and the celebrities. Metro was kind of a precursor of the internet because it's entirely free. So when I started writing for it, my friends would be like, but how does Metro make money? Because it's entirely free. And I'd go, because it's all advertising, and actually the amount that you pay when you pay for your paper, as people did back in those days, is very small in comparison to the media sales money that's generated for the paper. And in that sense, it was sort of democratic. Lots of people would pick up Metro. It wasn't just like you're a Guardian reader, so you'd pick that up. It had a broader sense, like the internet does today, of just any user can use it. And it has made a difference because now increasingly newspapers have shifted to a free model, which means that advertising becomes more important in the paper. The editorial voice is slightly under the cosh because it's more like the advertising department own the paper and we're the people who write for it. And before that, it was more like, we are the people who write this paper and you will fund us, do our brilliant words. And that has been a shift, I'd say, in what's happened. In terms of things going online, that has obviously also made a shift because suddenly you have this huge democracy of voices and much more film criticism than ever before. Like, there's film critics everywhere. You just click on, there's like this review, this opinion of this film, this opinion of this film, which is wonderful. But in terms of making a career as a professional journalist, not so good. That's been the main casualty. As a professional critic, that's been the main problem. That's the big issue for all of us. When I started, I remember fresh out of university going to a press screening, and I remember going in there and it was like this old boys club, and it was just full of all these old white guys from public school and universities, and they'd been there forever. And you had people like Alexander Walker and Philip French and Derek Malcolm, and they were all, they're all in 70s, I think, by that point. And it was like, this is a career. You come here, this is what a critic is. You come and sit in a dark room with these other men, and you'll just stay there and moulder away and very happily over the years eating your free biscuits, and that's your career for life. And within such a small amount of time, that's changed. It's extraordinary. It's completely flipped in just 10 years or less. Obviously, print not going so well, but we've got a new paper that's just launched, the New Day. We've got a new print-only paper that's just come out. Metro, that I write for, is only print. So it still exists. It's still fighting its corner. And in fact, there was still, for quite a long time, even though, and still now, I think, even with online journalists, even if you're an online journalist, you still want to be in print. And advertisers, they still want a print copy. They know that people are going to pick it up and it's going to be there. It's not a question of whether they'll see it or click it. It's actually in front of them. So print still has a prestige, I think, both editorially and commercially. Of course, it's not going to last forever. Of course it isn't. But I think still it does. It still does today. People still want to pick it up. I mean, social media is a huge part of the job, though, because what I review only goes in print. I can't promote it necessarily online, so it's quite frustrating. I can't tweet to what I've done. But as a professional person writing about film, I mean, I love the fact that you've got social media, and I think it's fantastic because I love having a dialogue with my readers. I like the fact that's what I've always loved about being a film reviewer, is that everybody has an opinion about film. Whoever you speak to, everyone loves film. Everyone's been to a film. I think that's what's so exciting about it. And being able to tweet people and people tweet you back is fantastic. And also there's things like the aggregators like Rotten Tomatoes. I use them the whole time. And on your Twitter feed, I mean, most of my Twitter feed, because of what I'm interested in, is about film. You get people from all around the world just tweeting stuff, or this happens, or wow, there's this news from there, or particularly global stuff. I think it's just opened up world cinema in that sense of these different markets. You want to find out what's happening in China, or films coming out of here, or Korea. People are going excitedly like, this is happening, and you really wouldn't have got that before. You've had to wait for maybe Variety or Screen International to sort of release one article that might be about that You don't have this big living thing about what's going on. I don't know, is it important? Is it important to have... It's important for me to be paid, definitely. I don't know if it's important for everyone else to feel that they're paid. But because there's such a proliferation of voices online, you have to feel that you're coming from somewhere. And I think maybe money isn't the... People would say, if you're a professional, that means that you're paid. But you have to have a presence, a website, a following. You have to sort of stand up for where you're coming from. Otherwise, it's just this endless sort of Twitterverse of little voices here and there. And I'm sure they all do have a validity. But in terms of, I don't know, for someone trusting your opinion, they have to really know you and follow you. That would be the first thing. The second thing is, of course, for what I'd call proper criticism in terms of analysis and in terms of perhaps something that in years to come, academics will look back and think, what was the popular opinion of the time? I suppose that would still, you want that to still exist. You want there to still be a forum in which that is valued. And I think that it will be. People will still look to critics, to voices that they trust, to people who've seen loads of films, who haven't just seen one film that year and go, oh my gosh, that was awesome, which seems to be what lots of online criticism can be. It's like, oh, we got invited to the Star Wars premiere. That was really exciting. It was amazing. Brilliant, brilliant. And you want to feel that there's a sort of have that enthusiasm, but perhaps have a slightly more measured approach and say, well, I have seen the other ones and I've seen this, and have you seen these other things, and have you taken this into consideration? A considered view is, I suppose, what you're looking for. And ideally a paid one would be good for me. I do worry that arts criticism, I'd say, overall is becoming perhaps what it was back in the day, back in Victorian times, this idea of it being the pursuit of someone who has already got enough money to pursue it, and it's just like this hobby that one does as a gentleman or gentlewoman who can do that with the luxury of actually being paid to do something else in their normal life, in their day job. I mean, that would seem worse somehow, that to go back to that. And you've got the democracy of anyone can do it and post stuff online, and that's all free. But yeah, to really have the chance to think about it, you have to be able to have a bit of money behind you to be able to do that, to have the luxury and also the education and the intelligent sort of time to think about things. If you don't have any money and you haven't got the time to think about things, then how, it becomes the realm of the privileged. It's interesting. I've had very little trolling, and I have definitely never had any sexist trolling that I can think of, which is quite surprising. And maybe because of my name, not everyone knows which gender I am sometimes, because I've got Ivan-Zadeh in my surname. Sometimes they're just looking, they'll think I'm called Ivan or something like that. The most abuse I ever get is for superhero films, and it really annoys me. I'm not, and this is a brave thing to say, the hugest fan of superhero films, because there's this massive glut of them. But it's almost, you cannot say that, especially online. If there's any hint of criticism of a superhero film, you get attacked mercilessly. And not in a gender term, but just by these sort of deranged, and I'll be sexist back, fanboys who are just like, how dare you say that? And you're like, I haven't even seen the film yet. How can you just judge from that point of view? And the reason that's worrying is because there is that idea of endless hype and money. Sorry, my husband coming in. With superhero films, there's so much money behind it and so much pressure to like this film and have the hype, and people from blogs who get to go and see them are usually really excited to go. And I think more than ever, it's really important to have someone who stands back from that and is able to go, no, this is not the film you're looking for. This is perhaps not the be all and end all that stands independently from that. I think that's what's increasingly become important in mainstream critical reviewing terms, to be able to stand outside that and not just sort of swallow all the hype. Yeah, well, when I first stepped into my first press screening, which had in 2000, it was definitely an old white boys club, and I did feel the odd one out, not only because I wasn't a man, but because I was a lot younger than everybody there, because back in those days you were a film critic for life. That has changed, and there are a few key women who at the Times you had Kate Muir, Wendy Ide, who was there, has gone, Camilla Long at the Sunday Times, but we're still the exception to the rule. If you go to, I sometimes look around, if you go to, say, a big screening like Star Wars, you're totally outnumbered. Maybe, I suppose in most screenings female would be 30% of the screening, and in terms of people of colour it's like way less. There's hardly anyone who's not white around. It's so important to have different voices. I don't think, I'm really, it's not, that's the thing, it's not like you have any overt sexism or anything like that. not very represented. But it's interesting because you have films that have been huge. There've been such a huge shift in the last few years in terms of female audiences, and really big films coming up like The Hunger Games and Frozen, which have shifted the landscape to have these really big mainstream films that are female-led. We didn't have that before. But you look at the reviews of Frozen and the reviews of the new Star Wars film, The Force Awakens. It was huge in the Star Wars The Force Awakens that the protagonist was female. And male critics did comment on that, but it wasn't like they were like, wow, oh my goodness, we have a female protagonist in Star Wars, which is good because they sort of just accepted it. But it was such a major shift. And for me watching it, it was astonishing. I was like, I can't believe that I'm seeing this. I've grown up watching mainstream films my whole life, watching the Star Wars. We had nothing like this. And I think not to recognise that just shows how there are different ways of looking at film. You know, really, really different ways that you don't really notice what you're seeing half the time, and different approaches. It's just the establishment. It's what people are used to. So, say for employing critics, you'd have a male editor, a male editorial staff, and they'd probably just get on a male film reviewer because that's what they know. I've noticed with me as a film editor, I'll often employ women writers without even really thinking about it. Yeah. You know, and when I do think about it, I'm like, oh, that's good because there aren't enough of us. But instinctively, you kind of tend to just go like to like. I think that is partly human nature. What we need to do is take a bit more of a step back and go, okay, well, that is a tendency, but actually what do we want from the paper? What are the different voices that we want to see? Because it's really important to get different views on different films.